Guess what? That's a really difficult thing to do if your head coach doesn't have buy-in on that process as well. So you got to have a head coach that believes in the process, is convicted in it, and it's a business, it's a transaction. People don't want to believe that it is. It's been that way for quite some time. That's what we're seeing here. So you can't talk about the transfer portal without talking about Colorado as well. And we bring in our friend Adam Munsterteiger. And Adam, we appreciate you being in, man. And it's portal season, and if there's one thing Deion Sanders knows, it's how to get the most out of the transfer portal. But let's start at the top, man. What do you make of today's portal entries for Colorado?
So far, pretty much expected. There are a couple guys that you would have liked their potential had they stayed in the program. Safety Jaden Milliner-Jones had played a lot of football for Colorado as a true freshman and was a guy that showed professional potential, but they're so stacked in the defensive backfield that maybe he didn't think that he was going to be a starter this year and wanted to go somewhere else for that opportunity. Savion Washington is another piece on the offensive line that if you're Colorado, you'd like to keep around. He would be a nice depth piece at tackle. He actually played pretty well through the first 5 games of last season and then suffered an ankle injury. And by the time he came back from that ankle injury, Colorado's offensive line was really in shambles at that point. So it's really kind of a retooling of that whole offensive line. And Colorado is been expected to be a very active participant in the transfer portal. We expect them to go after a couple linebackers, continue to fill up that offensive line. Right now, you probably feel good about 7 of the offensive linemen that are on this roster right now, but certainly you've got to add a few more pieces to that group. So generally, it hasn't been surprising. A lot of the names that have popped up were guys that weren't even on the spring roster or had a very limited role, but those 2 guys I mentioned were guys that you'd probably like to keep in this program if you could.
Yeah, offensive line is certainly going to be the focus for Deion Sanders. They got to keep Shedeur upright, and that's going to be something that's going to be of the utmost importance. So, I know you've been talking about that. They got 7 guys that they like. Is it right now for them? Is it more depth? Can you go out there, get a top-end starter? Where do they kind of fall in terms of the market right now?
Yeah, that's a challenging thing, right? Is they've got a pretty good group right now that they like. And so you're going to have to sell somebody that's willing to come in and compete for a spot. And, they've targeted a few guys and they feel pretty good about them already. So we'll see. Now, I do think that group is going to be vastly improved. Now, the question is, how does that depth come in? And I guess the next few weeks will tell us the story there.
Adam, outside of offensive line, and I know the Buffs got needs, everybody's got needs this time of year, is there one position group where you say, hey, going into the fall, they got to get this right, they got to be able to execute here over the next couple weeks?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier linebacker is a position that they need help. They had DJ Lundy from Florida State committed as a transfer, and he was kind of what they thought the doctor ordered because this was a defense that struggled against the run. Coach Prime mentioned that, hey, our biggest keys this offseason are getting better running the football and stopping the run. And so DJ Lundy going back to Florida State kept that as a big need for this program. They like Vonta Bentley and Trevor Woods coming down, a converted safety, but they've really got to fortify that depth if they want to have the defense they're hoping to in 2024.
Adam, we appreciate you, man. You got a nice view there. Enjoy the weather over there. We're all very, very jealous of you. Appreciate you stopping by. Adam Munsterteiger from BuffStampede.com for the latest news on the Buffs, football, and recruiting. Make sure to visit BuffStampede.com. Savion Washington, he started nine games. He had over 660 snaps at right tackle. You got Chaz Wallace in there as well. 4 starts, sack and a half in 2023. Miles Slusher, the former top 247 prospect, he only started 1 game. He's in the portal. David Connor, he didn't see any action in 2023. Colorado now returns 0 offensive line starters in 2024. This was a position that I think a lot of people questioned when Deion Sanders came into that role. Not so much Deion Sanders' ability to acquire talent, but that was going to be a position of need that they needed to really kind of take head on. And they've done some things already. We saw that in the December portal. But so far, what have you seen from Deion Sanders, his staff, trying to fortify that offensive line with a lot of expectations Shedeur Sanders coming back?
Well, they've completely replaced the offensive line. So the last guy who was still there, Washington, was one of the guys who started last year, played 660 snaps. But for everybody who watched Colorado play, you know that was the weakness of their football team, the offensive line. They completely revamped it in terms of getting all 5 guys out. They've got 6 new guys in, and I expect them to still be active. As Smoke talks about all this morning on the show, you still need to add some more depth. So I expect them to still be very active in going after offensive linemen in this portal window as well.
Smoke, I was thinking about it. It's incredibly difficult to replace your entire starting offensive line via the transfer portal. I mean, you talk about a challenge. If that was the one thing you had to get done in the transfer portal, that's really hard to do. That being said, Chris, and I'll put you into this conversation as well, I thought Deion Sanders did a really good job of that in December. How important is it? I mean, it goes without saying, but how important is it for Colorado and their overall team success to keep Shedeur Sanders clean?
Well, if your quarterback's not upright, you're in trouble. And we had that debate going back and forth. Is he a Heisman Trophy candidate? Yeah, certainly he is. He's one of the better quarterbacks out there. But I think this is where you get yourself in trouble when you just attack the transfer portal all the way through when you talk about offensive line. I believe that if you do get 6 guys out of the portal, you got to roll with 16 to 17 guys anyway. That's where you can really dive into high school players. So when those portal guys that have 2 years of eligibility that you bring in finishes up through graduation or via the NFL, you can slide those young guys in, and now you have guys that have been inside of your system, understand your culture. Now you're building a team. So you don't have to attack the portal every single time, because one of the hardest things to do is find 5 guys that can play together and have continuity.
Buffs also just lost Tavares Dawson to the portal, who's a former Auburn transfer. Chris, I keep coming back to you on this NIL stuff because it is so fascinating. What does that operation look like in Boulder? And you got to think, I mean, it's been a complete 180 since Prime has arrived there. Just your feel, your pulse on kind of their situation.
It's a competitive one. I wouldn't say it's a top tier collective necessarily nationally, but when you add what they have to the unique appeal of Deion Sanders, I think it could be very efficient depending on the athlete. And they've done a really good job identifying needs and adding talented players. I do agree with what Smoke said about the offensive line, but I think they've done a really good job reinvigorating it. And at the end of the day, what they have is a top 5, top 10 pick potentially at quarterback. You have a window. You got to play into that window as much as you can. And if they feel like the way to do that is via the transfer portal to keep him upright, I think that's the way you have to play it, because he's only going to be there for one more season, and you got to take advantage of that as much as they can. And I will say, I know we're not talking wide receivers right now, but they're going to have the best wide receiver group in the Big 12. Like, that group is loaded thanks to what they took in the transfer portal and what they bring back. So you just got to keep them upright, give them a couple seconds, and the ball's going to come out and go to some talented playmakers. Certainly
a lot of weapons, especially on the perimeter for Deion Sanders, Shedeur Sanders as well. I mean, a lot of expectations, right? Deion already talking early about the NFL draft and who he wants Shedeur to play for. So Colorado going to be a team to watch, and a team that's going to have to get the offensive line right if they're going to compete for a college football playoff appearance. Smoke, how close is Colorado from eventually competing for a Big 12 title and maybe getting into that 12-team playoff conversation?
When you have game changers, such as Hunter and Shedeur, you're always in it. What I'm going to say to Carl about Colorado is, as much as Travis Hunter plays and as much as reps as they get, I think adding a piece back there in the secondary, a veteran guy that can come in and give him some spell, just give him some time off so he can go over there and be productive on offense as well too, would help them out. But you're always in a fight when you have top 10 players that's going to be in the NFL draft to win close games. Because when you win your close games, your best players come through, and I'm believing those two beating the others.
Chris, how big of a factor can Deion be in this spring portal window? I mean, there hadn't been a ton of high-power names or names that maybe are that recognizable so far on day one, but from the names out there in terms of the needs that they have, how big of a factor can Colorado be?
I think Colorado's always going to be a factor if they choose to be a factor. I mean, I've talked to so many players and so many recruits. If the number for Deion Sanders rings you, man, you're going to pick up, right? Like, no matter who you are. They might not have a shot at the guy because of NIL or something like that, but Deion Sanders is always going to be a factor in these recruitments. And if they need a linebacker, when they do need a linebacker, Carl's absolutely right about that. Like, they're going to probably find a linebacker. It might not be somebody at everybody's top of the board, but they're going to fill needs. And I think if they add a little bit more offensive line, defensive line depth, and maybe an impact linebacker, this is a team that, with a difficult schedule, can win 7, 8, 9 games next year potentially. That's the ceiling.